So we are talking about the healing power of hands today, and I have a lot of information to go through again. It's kind of a long one, hopefully not as long as the chemical peel class, but it'll be good, I promise. Pulling from the archetype deck today from Kim Krantz, it's the Wild Unknown. This is like my favorite artist for cards. I think I've said that before. But I'm going to keep pulling from the archetype decks this whole series. That way we can kind of play with some different archetypes. Except I don't want a real archetype, the same one we pulled last week. Ooh, that's a good one. All right, some of these cards are not archetypes exactly, so I wanted to try to get one. I got the Warrior again, which we did last week. So we're going to embrace instead the Shaman. And I love this because this is one of the healer archetypes, the Shaman. So I'm going to pull about the Shaman so we can talk about it a little bit. So the Shaman is also referred to as the sorcerer or medicine woman. And the shaman is really someone who goes through multiple phases. So they go through being the healer, the mentor, and also the role of like going into the underworld, because that's one of the things about shamans is that they can go between worlds, and they go in between worlds to pull back pieces of ourselves or pieces of our spirit or of other spirits that have left our bodies, essentially, usually because of splitting, because we experience some sort of trauma. So the shaman does that in order to heal us. And some of the light aspects are fearless, student, and practitioner. So always the student, essentially. And when we look at the dark elements, we see things like over promises, blaming, hurting self or others. I think over promising is one of the standard shadow elements of the healer, is over promising and really taking on things to themselves that they don't need to because they should be left out in the ether. But, you know, in an effort to heal people, we take on their pain sometimes. Yeah, one of the things they say about the shaman in this book is that the shaman has to constantly be doing shadow work because of the fact that the shaman often reaches into the shadow of other people. They're really prone to taking on those shadow elements and being exposed to a lot of darkness. So they have to constantly be working through that. And I think that's something to think about for this week because it's a huge focus of what we're going to talk about. Oh, a lot about shadow last week too, but that's not the point of this. So let's talk about the power of our hands. So as far as this goes, what we're going to talk about are really the aspects of touch and then where our hands come in as a healing modality. So as far as touch goes, you know, we have major human needs as far as touch goes. We need to be touched for human development. It's part of our growth as from being a baby to a child into adulthood is the aspect of being touched. And touch is really related with our nervous system, and our nervous system controls healing. So that's an important aspect. We're going to dive in a little bit on physical touch, since that's, for most of us, our jobs is touching people. So what are the different types of touch and how do we communicate things through touch? And then we're going to talk a little bit about energy work, which is fun. This is going to be things like how to use your hands to sense energies and maybe doing some cleansing and balancing because our hands are powerful tools for that too. And then we'll dive into a little bit of the shadow work on, I mean, we're going to talk about this along the way, but as a final reminder, like what is the shadow work? How does shadow show up in this element and why is it affecting our industry so much? So to start, let's talk about the healer archetype again. So we talked last week about the healer, the light and shadow elements, and we talked about archetypes and how there are these universal images that show up in our collective unconscious. It's part of our ancestral memory. We know these things. And to go along with that, we have these images that show up, or It's more than just images. There's also places and, specific things. But in this case, we're talking about the image of the hands. So you can even, go back as far as possible in history, and the use of hands is used as an element of healing. So the healer is often depicted laying their hands on another person. In this case, we have, for example, Jesus laying hands on a child. And this happens throughout the Bible. As Jesus is healing people, he's laying his hands on them and curing whatever is wrong with them. In ancient Greece and Rome, we see massage being used as a healing modality. So healers are often depicted performing massage on their patients. And to move forward in history, we have surgeons. Surgeons use their hands. They're often, I have heard stories before of like surgeons insuring their hands because their hands are essential to being able to make money and do their work. And so surgeon hands are very important. Also, when I looked up pictures of surgeons, I often see them like this, like their hands up. Like, that if someone's standing there with their hands like this with gloves on, that they're a surgeon. They're going to do something really important with their hands. And then I tried to look into pop culture a little bit, and actually, ET stood out to me the most. First of all, because ET freaks me out. But one of the cool things about ET in this aspect is his power was healing. He would heal Elliot, the boy that he obviously loved, by touching him with his glowing finger. So even ET, the extraterrestrial, was using his hands for healing, which I think is really cool. What that means to us is that the use of hands is synonymous with healing. When we think of an image of someone healing, that's going to look like laying hands on someone. And when we see images of people laying their hands on someone, we automatically know, our brain receives that message automatically, that they're touching them, oftentimes for the benefit of healing or to make them feel better, which is healing in and of itself. So these are things that we already know. They're archetypal images. So hands are also used for symbolism. We see the use of hands, well, not the use of hands necessarily. We see the use of hands, but we also see hands just depicted in images in these different ways. And these gestures have universal meaning, which says to us that hands are tools of communication. So we can use them to communicate visually. So when hands are held like this, oftentimes we understand that that's prayer or asking for something. When we see the image of a fist, that means strength or power. When we see hands down, that's often giving. And if we see hands like this, that's receiving. Like the image of being like this or meditating like this, like we're receiving something from the environment, from the ether. When we lay our hands like this, that's calming our hearts. That's meant to be like calming, nourishing feeling, right? So this symbolism is seen through art and literature. They have universal meanings for the most part. And I even found some information about like different hand gestures. Apparently they were depicted in like Renaissance paintings and how they all meant different things. So if like a hand was like this, it was a blessing from a king, which is really interesting to think about. It also leads us to the point of like sign language. Hands can be used for communication. So we can both send information in that way, and we can receive information through our hands, because our hands are very powerful touch receptors. And so with that, we're going to talk about the anatomy of the hand. So our hands are these really complex, delicate structures. They are unique to humans. So while other animals have similar digits, they don't have opposable thumbs. That's something that's different in us and primates. And we are able to perform these very precise movements and apply force in very specific ways that animals aren't necessarily able to do. That's something that's unique to us. About 1/4 of the bones in our body are actually in our hands. That's huge, because we have huge bodies. I mean, our bodies are big. So the fact that most of our bones, or not most of our bones, but a quarter of our bones in and of itself are in our hands, that's a lot. There are tons of muscles too. There's over 30 muscles in each hand. Some of them extend from the forearm and go all the way through the hand, and others are just these little itty bitty muscles that are in the fingers. And what that means is that we're able to perform all of these different ranges of motion. The strongest muscles in our hands are actually going to be in the thenar eminence, which is this area right here, and the hypothenar eminence, which is here. And that's important to think about because when we are talking about the touch that we can give to other people and we're trying to adjust our pressure, part of that comes from the capability of the muscles in our hand to actually apply that pressure. And we get a lot of pressure actually from using this thenar eminence, this pad underneath our thumb. Which is helpful also for making sure that you protect your hands, which is something we can also talk about. So the other thing that we have running through our hands is, of course, muscle tendons, nerves, and blood vessels, and they run from the arm through the carpal tunnel, which is right through here. And that's important because carpal tunnel is a disease that can affect estheticians and our clients as well. So it's something to think about if we're working on hands. But it's also important to our hand health overall in our career to make sure that we're protecting these areas. There's two main arteries that supply blood to the hand. They run on the little finger and the thumb side, and they actually cross in the palm in this like hoop to be able to flow through the palm as well. And then there's three main nerves that send messages and receive messages. There's one on the back, one on the front, and then one that helps more with motor function. Overall, though, there's about 17,000 touch receptors just in our hands. Our fingers are made to be extremely sensitive so that we can feel things, including the lightest touch with our fingers and the palm of our hands. So there are free nerve endings, there's those touch receptors, there's all sorts of different touch receptors. Oh my gosh, you could go down a rabbit hole with this. Some of them, are very detailed and they feel only like little tiny touches, and some of them feel heat, and some of them feel large amounts of touch. But all that to say, the fingertips especially are extremely sensitive to touch. And that's important for us because if we want to be able to feel things from people, feel energies, feel the movements and the muscles, we need to be touching them with our fingertips, which to me means no gloves. But that is a whole other conversation now. This is why I think you should touch people with your bare hands, is what I'm getting at. That's a little bit about, why our hands are so powerful in and of themselves. But next we're going to dive into how this actually relates to what we need in order to function and then what we can do for our clients. So what are our needs as humans? As we develop, we go through these different stages, and at different stages, we're hardwired to respond to touch. We are born ready to respond to touch. We're born with touch receptors. We're born to process that information, and it becomes part of who we are. It also stimulates responses in the body. So touch is going to stimulate different hormones, which we'll talk about. Touch stimulates different responses in the brain that turn things on or turn things off. So it's very important from the beginning that we're touched. In fact, at birth, skin to skin contact has become so much more prevalent now because research is showing the benefits that, let's say, babies that are born prematurely, when exposed to touch for even 15 minutes a day, gain weight faster. So they're healthier, they're thriving. That immediate skin to skin contact is used even after C-sections. And they're doing it now before they wash the baby. So because as soon, think about being in the womb, like we're covered in fluid and touch. We're constantly touching something. And then to come out into the world and kind of be alone, that's a lot. So that touch, that instant touch, is important for regulation. It immediately settles the baby, regulates the heart rate, begins their suckling reflex, And as far as mothers go, it stimulates oxytocin, and that's going to be really important for lactation and for healing after you have a baby. So that touch is important at birth, is what I'm getting at. For babies, touch creates a sense of safety. It improves your neurological function. Give me just a sec. Someone in the waiting. Touch is also important for weight gain. As babies grow, it's kind of similar to being newborns, but they need to be touched in order to gain weight. This is proven once again through studies of infants who, both animal primate infants and human infants. As far as childhood goes, there was this big research study of children that grew up in an orphanage in Russia, which showed that touch-deprived children have lower cortisol levels and show developmental delays. So they do not learn to regulate either on a level of homeostasis in the body. So the body actually sending those chemical messengers and doing what it's supposed to do. But it's also affecting their growth and their emotional growth as well. One of the studies I found about was with monkeys, I think, said that when infant monkeys were basically born and then grew up in isolation, they were deeply disturbed. I don't know what that means, so it sounds terrible. Now, as adults, touch is related to tons of poor health outcomes. And of course, these are things that like probably manifested in childhood, but we even see this like crazy amount of touch deprivation right now because of COVID. So we've been in a global pandemic. Many people were inside for a year and a half. They weren't touching people. Single people especially were like extremely isolated. Older people who lived alone, extremely isolated. So what we see now is more instances of depression, anxiety, not just from being isolated and not having contact with people like in a face-to-face way, but in a touch way. Like their bodies are actually deprived of touch, and that causes some pretty serious issues mentally as well. So some of the poor outcomes that we see because of a lack of touch over the course of our lives include things like higher infant mortality rates. So when infants are touched less, they are more likely to not thrive, not gain weight, and be subject to SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. We also see poor bonding between mother and baby after birth, low milk production because there's no oxytocin, and higher PPD, which is also related to low oxytocin. We see poor weight gain in children, stunted growth, low cortisol, which manifests as fatigue, dizziness, weight loss, muscle weakness, mood changes, darkening patches in the skin, dark eyes, as an example. Way higher levels of stress because touch actually turns on those like neurotransmitters that help us to regulate stress. And we also see lowered immune function, which going back to the idea of being isolated in a pandemic, like we kind of need our immune function to survive diseases. So then to be touch deprived and have our immune function kind of slowed down is really detrimental. And it also affects our ability to form strong bonds or relationships. Touch is part of forming a relationship, and not just like intimate touch, but regular touch, like touching someone's shoulder, patting them on the back. They have all these studies in school of children who were like touched by a teacher, like on the shoulder. And it actually led to them being more active in class, being more talkative, connecting more with their teacher and being more open with their teacher, which is really interesting. And we see increased severity of conditions like anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder. Actually, there was a study specifically on borderline personality and touch that showed that the severity of symptoms was way higher in people who were touch deprived. And in a physical manner, heart disease, because touch actually regulates the heartbeat. So we see higher blood pressure and higher heartbeats in people who are touch deprived. Kind of crazy. So what happens when we are touched? A few different things. We're going to start with the hormonal aspects. So these three hormones, or you could think of them as hormones or neurotransmitters, are released through touch, and they actually help us in so many ways. So oxytocin, as an example, was the one that's related to our reproductive functions and post-childbirth functions. But it's considered the love hormone. Like, this is what we release when we are first in a relationship with someone, and like we're like really high energy and feel like head over heels in love. Um, it increases our relaxation and trust. So that hormone is part of us building that relationship. Like, it helps us to immediately trust that person, sometimes a little too much, to be honest. But it also helps with psychological stability, bonding, and social memory. So being able to remember things that happen when you're in a social environment or you're in an environment where your oxytocin is increased. Serotonin is the next one. Serotonin is our key mood and happiness hormone. This is the one that's especially linked to depression and the inability of the body to process serotonin in one way or another. So it's really important for mood regulation, and it's released when we're touched. So touch can help to regulate mood and increase happiness and increase feelings of well-being. Of course, it's not a cure for depression or a medication, but it helps to regulate symptoms. It helps to reduce the severity of those symptoms. It also is very important for digestion, getting to sleep. So it's like a precursor to melatonin. And then wound healing is extremely important. So you need serotonin for wound healing. So another thing that is really beneficial to us as far as our careers go. The last one that I want to talk about is dopamine. So dopamine is our reward hormone. It sends this message to our brain that we've been rewarded. It signifies satisfaction and pleasure, and it creates habit loops. So especially people who have ADHD, have issues with dopamine, and they get into these habit loops that increase their dopamine because they need it like this to keep going. So uh, we feel dopamine when or when we feel dopamine, we feel like we're being rewarded, and that boosts our mood, it boosts our motivation, our need or our want to do things, and it helps us pay attention for longer. So this also is going to affect then our learning and our emotional response to things like learning. And so that can be one of the reasons why touch in a learning environment is actually very important. Um, it's interesting to think about how we can incorporate these things, these concepts in ways to help our clients, because we do get to touch them. That's something that's different about our careers, but and any other career is that we get to touch people. That's not normal. So we'll talk about that too. Uh, the next thing I want to touch on is the nervous system as far as how we perceive touch. So these next few slides are actually from the holistic facial course. So I think it's something that we needed to touch on to understand how healing takes place in response to touch. So I want to start with the nervous system. We have three main parts to our nervous system. That's going to be the central, the peripheral, and the autonomic. The central nervous system includes our brain and our spinal cord. The peripheral are all the things that go out to the side. And the autonomic, the ANS, is responsible for all those automatic things that happen in our body, like digestion, breathing, heartbeat, etc. It's also responsible for our fight or flight response and healing. And so that's what we're going to dive into, is the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. The first one is the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system's job is to stimulate the fight or flight response. And that fight or flight response leads to things like aggression, combative behavior, avoidance, running away, social withdrawal, anger, and sometimes substance abuse in modern culture. Now, in ancient times, if you will, this is part of us surviving. So it's a biological factor that exists because of evolution. We evolved. We were able to survive because our sympathetic nervous system was saving us from danger. Now, what happens when our body is in fight or flight is that our digestion and peristalsis stops. That's like our release of enzymes and moving the digestive system. That stops. So we don't digest. It diverts blood flow away from the gastrointestinal tract and the skin. So our skin is no longer getting nutrients. It increases the heart rate and causes vasodilation of coronary vessels of the heart, which can be a factor in heart disease. And then it constricts all the intestinal sphincters, and the urinary sphincter usually results in like an immediate release of anything that's held in your body, any waste that you have there, and then it stops, so you don't go to the bathroom. And that's so you can, run away for longer, essentially, is why that's happening. So why that affects us now is that what is happening is people who experience stress are staying in this fight or flight response for long periods of time. And if you think about the inhibiting of digestion and increased heart rate and inability to go to the bathroom, this can have a major impact on our health. And to our career, your skin, because your skin isn't getting blood and you're not digesting your food or your nutrients, so you're not getting benefits of the nutrients. They essentially run through your body. So let's say you do eat, you're not going to digest. Your digestive system isn't going to remove things. It's going to go straight into the waste system. And if you're able to eliminate it, then it goes out and you don't get anything out of it. And if you can't, then it turns into constipation. So not good either way. But our job is to try to get people out of this, to get people into a state of relaxation. Because when we turn off the fight or flight response, when we counteract that with the parasympathetic nervous system, we move into this phase of recovery. It's rest and relaxation. The heart slows, the muscles relax, we start to heal, which is, very important, and we can digest again. So essentially what happens here is the blood vessels dilate that lead to the GI tract, and it increases the blood flow, and the digestive tract starts working again. It stimulates salivary gland secretion, and it accelerates the peristalsis, so that release of enzymes. We cry, tears are released. So this is important once again. And then urination and defecation can take place. Now, why is this all important? These are things we see happen in a facial when someone is relaxed. We hear gurgling from digestion. They actually salivate more, especially when you are doing lymphatic drainage and you get them into a very relaxed, like parasympathetic state, essentially. And sometimes they shed a tear or two, maybe even more. People cry. It happens. Now, why are people stuck in this fight or flight response? It's because we have constant stress and unresolved trauma. It keeps the SNS working. It constantly thinks that we're in a state of shock or flight. And it leads to all of these poor outcomes: slower healing, poor digestion, inability to relax, chronic illness, inflammation, poor immune function. So our job then is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And a lot of that comes from touch. Our touch stimulates responses that activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have to be touching people, and we really have to do it in a very calculated way. So I want to touch a little bit too on the vagus nerve. So this is our longest cranial nerve. It runs from like right here around the ear all the way down the body to the colon, essentially from brain to colon. It is responsible for both sensory and motor functions. And this is an important aspect because not all nerve systems do that. Some of them are only sensory or only motor, but the vagus nerve does both. It is responsible for the sensation of the skin around the ear and certain parts of the throat, mainly like right through here. It controls our heart rate. So it can help with things like heart disease, high blood pressure, etc. And it controls the muscles of the digestive system. So the cool thing is that we can actually help to stimulate the vagus nerve and activate the parasympathetic nervous system in our treatments. And there's a few ways to do that. One is to massage the skin around the ears. Don't avoid the ears. You need to work in front of and behind. And you can even put gentle pressure on the ears. I found a video for this and I think I put it in the resources. But in one of them, she was pressing in this little divot here. So if you go like around the fold of the ear and into this little spot, you actually just press in it very gently. You don't need to put a lot of pressure. You can even do this on your clients. And then the other space is actually where my AirPod is sitting. So you can press the finger in there and press down just a little bit, very gentle pressure. Those are two places where you can like immediately activate the parasympathetic nervous system. It seems to me like that would be a good place to maybe start a treatment, is with some ear compressions. You can also massage the throat, like especially this area right here. Like I like to do a pinching motion here. This is going to be on the SCM or the sternocleidomastoid. But that, even very gentle and rhythmic, is very relaxing, or you can do it with like a lymphatic motion like this. Once again, a really good starting point to get people to relax. You can also have them do deep diaphragmatic breathing because the diaphragm is located in the area of the vagus nerve in the body, like down in the lower part of the body. So when you breathe deeply and take in air into the diaphragm, it actually stimulates the vagus nerve, and so this can help a lot with relaxation. And you want to have a slower inhale and a longer exhale, because the exhale, that force, is actually part of what stimulates the vagus nerve. So this could be like not necessarily triangle breathing, but maybe I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that I have in the course. There's a few different ones, but maybe like breathing in for a count of 4, holding for a count of 4, and exhaling for a count of 6. Or I think there's one where it's double, where you breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 8. And that's going to help with stimulating that vagus nerve. Foot massage, everybody's favorite. I actually don't mind foot massage. I like it better than hand massage. And then cold immersion on the face. So one of the things I found is talking about like dunking your face in hot water. That's not necessarily something that we can do. Like a cold jelly mask is probably a good idea, or any sort of cold therapy on the face can help to stimulate the vagus nerve as well. Just things to think about. I have some ideas also for cold immersions. I like to keep like crystals or stones that I'm going to use on the face in a bowl of ice. And the ice kind of melts throughout the treatment, but either way, by the time you get to the point of using them, they're cold. So you can like put a mask on the face, not necessarily a jelly mask, something else. And you take the stones and place them where you want on the face, and then wrap it all in a hot towel. Actually feels really good, especially for people who don't like to be cold. Like I hate being cold, but that combination of cold and hot is a different sensory experience. It feels really cool. People say that every time I do it, like, that was so cool when you did that cold and that hot thing. Feels really good. So let's talk about then physical touch and what it all means, how we tie this all in. So our tactile system refers to our sense of touch, and it's an important factor, right, in us understanding and reacting to the world around us. So our clients will understand and respond to things because their tactile system is activated. And it is activated by touching the skin. So anything that touches the skin, pressure, pain, temperature, vibration, is all taken in by the tactile system and processed in the brain. And sometimes it processes faster than we realize, faster than we think. So one example I want you to think about is tickling. When you get tickled, you don't sit there and go, oh, I'm being tickled, maybe I'm going to pull my arm away. You just move because you feel that sensation, and automatically your brain goes, this is not okay, and you move out of the way. Same thing, like if you walk through spider webs, as an example, like you feel that tickle and you run away. If you feel a bug on you, you feel it, you don't know what it is, you run away. And that's because that's how our brain responds automatically to light touch. So light touch refers to when the skin senses something light and it doesn't know what it is, the immediate response is protective warning system, run away. We move away from whatever is touching us. Now, this is important when it comes to communicating things through touch. If you touch someone extremely lightly, like no pressure, what is their body going to do? It's probably going to react like it doesn't know what this is and it's going to jump. And that means that we need to be a little bit more calculated about how we touch people so that their discriminative touch can come in and say, no, that's not something wrong. That's this thing and it's happening here and this is what's happening. So our discriminative touch system is what provides specific information about what we're touching or being touched by. So this comes into play when I'm touching my phone. Like, I know what this is and how it feels. And that's because my discriminative touch is being processed by my brain. It's also a part of fine motor skills, like being able to do little detailed work. Then we have deep touch, and our deep touch sense is basically sensing pressure. So how hard we're being touched. Really deep touch can be very soothing. So think about pressure or weight. Deep pressure is usually more soothing than light pressure, to a certain extent. We're gonna talk about this next. But weight or constant deep touch over the body, like a weighted blanket, can almost mute the nervous system. So it kind of calms that initial light touch response that the body might have, and because it senses this nice deep pressure that's like enveloping the body and keeping it really safe. Which leads us to talking about communication through touch. So there's a lot of research actually about communicating through touch. It's called haptic communication. That's what the field of study is called. And this refers to our ability to send messages and communicate feelings through touch. This is, most of the research comes from, autistic children, nonverbal children, um, children with learning disabilities, or, sensory issues actually is a big one. But it can be applied to what we do as well. So that's important to think about. Ways that we communicate touch on a regular basis include things like handshakes, hugs. We pat people on the back, or we put a gentle hand on their back to lead the way as we're walking to our treatment room. Handshakes and hugs are two things that have kind of been taken away from us because of social distancing, which means that our touch in the treatment room is that much more important. And in addition to that, our touch in the treatment room may be the only touch that that person is receiving outside of their family. And oftentimes it is the only touch that they have received in like the last 2 years. I hear people say that all the time. Like, I haven't gotten a facial in 2 years. I haven't gotten a facial in 2 years. I haven't gotten a facial since before COVID. Especially where I work, because it's a resort and people come there for the purpose of these services. And this is really their first time getting out and feeling safe to go out and do these types of things. So, I feel like I probably hear it more often than people who work in a regular spa, because I don't have regular clients necessarily. I have clients that come once and they're coming for this reason. So anyways, that being said, in a treatment, what this looks like is our introduction and saying goodbye. And what I mean is introducing ourselves to the body and saying goodbye to the body. So introducing our touch by how we like the first touch on the body. How does that happen? What kind of pressure are we using? That's our first means of communication with the person, is touching them in some way. How we say goodbye to the body is how we finish the treatment. How do we tell them that we're done? How do we move our hands throughout the treatment? How do we apply and remove hot towels? Super important. How do we place or remove anything on the body? If you're using stones, if you're using, cotton rounds over the eyes, if you're putting glasses over the eyes to protect from LED or from mag lamps or whatever, how do you do that? How do you wrap their head in a towel? How do you wrap them in the bed? So do they get a weighted blanket? Do they get wrapped up like a burrito? I know we used to do like mummy wrapping with Dermalogica. Do you have really soft sheets and a soft blanket? Do you have a squishy table? Does your table warm? I forgot to put temperature on here as a sense, but all of these things are very important. So if we want to communicate through touch, then we have to think about what each of these things means and how do we do it in a very intentional way. Intention is really the first step. Set an intention before you begin. What do you want the person to feel? How do you want them to feel? And sometimes we need to do this, not just in the treatment, but as we're brainstorming, what is our routine going to look like? What is our protocol going to look like? What is my room going to look like? What is my table going to look like? Brainstorm all of that and think of it all as, how do you want the person to feel? How do you want them to feel when they walk in the room? Because that relaxation should start to happen even before you touch them. But that being said, how do you want them to feel? And then in the treatment, you're thinking about, what am I going to communicate to them? What do they need from me right now? And you get that information from your intake and your consultation. What do they need? Do they need to feel love? Do they need to feel safe? Do they need to feel happy? Do they need to feel free? Do they need to feel strong? Do they need to feel creative? Like, what do they need out of this? So find those things out. And then you need to check your emotions, because your emotions will be communicated to them regardless. So if you are not feeling it, you need to check yourself. And that's something we're actually gonna talk about when we talk about business spells and rituals, is like, how do we mentally prepare ourselves so that we can give the most to our client? It's really important to try to feel what you want them to feel so that you communicate that with your hands. So some other things to think about are weight. I'm a big proponent of weighted blankets because they do dampen the nervous system and they really help the person to relax. Like, you literally feel, we think about how you want people to feel. If safe is one thing that comes to mind for you, if that's one of your words that you're going to put as your ways you want people to feel, then I would say invest in a weighted blanket because it really does help. Deep pressure. So deep pressure is really good for people who have highly sensitive nervous systems. So this is something that you could put on your intake and kind of get some information from them. But people that have highly sensitive nervous systems, that light touch is going to bother them. I'm one of those people, so I'm speaking from my own experience here that deep pressure for me is way better than gentle pressure. I'm getting a lot better about this, actually. I'm getting more like in the mindset where I'm able to accept gentle pressure, but it has to be intentional gentle pressure. So like, this is how the massage is meant to go. This is lymphatic drainage. It's meant to be like that. If someone's using gentle pressure on me and they should be using deep pressure, like with a cleanse, it really bothers me. Like, it gives me anxiety because my body can't process that information very well. So gentle pressure with rhythm does help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, but it needs to not be tickling, I guess is what I'm getting at. And it does need to have rhythm and flow. Rhythm and flow are part of our communication style. So our individual communication style. And it does help to enhance the relaxation to have rhythm. This is actually a very important part of lymphatic drainage techniques, gentle pressure, but it's not rubbing. So that's the part that doesn't tickle, it's pressing. And your fingers don't really move off the body as you're doing these pressing motions. You use rhythm with it, and it really helps to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You immediately start to hear people's stomach gurgling, and you hear them start to swallow more because they're salivating. Super cool to see happen in real life. So knowing what we can communicate through touch, then we need to think about what are we trying to make people feel? So what is our intention? And sometimes I like to think about this in terms of, what is our inspiration? Like, what do I want to be? What's my facial archetype or my massage archetype? Like, what am I embodying for this person? And my favorite thing right now is to think about the elements. I put this in here. So thinking about fire, what does fire feel like? Like, when you're sitting by a fire, you feel warm, you feel cozy, you know, feel like looking at fire is very intoxicating and relaxing, like puts you in a deep state of relaxation, like looking at the fire and seeing like the crackling and the smoke, right? So what does that feel like? Fire is generally like a little bit aggressive. That sounds bad, but it's stronger than some of the other elements and faster. So to me, this is like deep pressure, fast rhythm when I think of fire. Air is light. It flows over you. It feels like light and free. And to me, air is light pressure, fast rhythm. Things to think about. Earth is grounding. It makes us feel safe. It makes us feel secure. It makes us feel like we're, uh, grounded is the only word I can think of, right? And the earth element to me is deep pressure, slow rhythm, consistent, slow, consistent rhythm. And then water is definitely more light, um, but it can also be strong. And so water is cleansing. It makes us feel so relaxed. Like think of the ocean. The ocean is a good example because the water runs at different speeds. It comes out and it goes in. And there is a rhythm to it, but it's also inconsistent. Um, so for me, water has actually been mine. I've been trying to like make everything feel like an ocean or a water or a stream. So I've been really kind of diving into this idea with my touch. And people get that. Like they will say, like, it felt like I was floating or floating in water. Or even my hairstylist said to me when she was doing my hair, we're talking about massage, and she's like, oh, when you go get a massage, like you want to feel like that water element, like smooth and flowy. And I thought it was really interesting because I was already like really diving deep on this aspect. And I was like, that's exactly what I try to do with a facial. I try to make everybody feel like there's water flowing over them and it's cleansing them and calming them. And so to me, what water has looked like is both light and deep pressure because it changes. If it's fluid, it flows. And rhythm that changes. So sometimes it's slow and sometimes it's fast. We do those different parts in the treatment, and it really kind of takes people on a journey almost, which I really love. But some people aren't going to respond to that. So I think with elements, maybe one way to kind of discern where you should go with this is seeing what their sign is. I am a water sign, so this makes total sense to me, but a fire sign may not appreciate that. So, and I think it's really funny because when I think of my esthetician and the way that she massages my face, I think of fire. Like it's strong and bold, and she's a fire sign. So it makes sense, right? Maybe we automatically do that without thinking about it. Anyway, the other things to think about are the emotions we want. So calm. What does calm feel like? And how do you make someone feel calm with touch? What's calming? To me, it's very calming to pump this area. Like something about touching in this heart area is very calming. It's very calming to use these like gentle rhythmic motions. And that's how I make people feel calm. Love. What does love feel like? Like a hug, like a squeeze to me, like squeezing is loving. How do you make people feel safe? So like strong, slow motions, I think are safe. And how do you make people feel free? So things to think about, I guess, is what I'm going at here. So last but not least, we're going to talk about the energetic aspects. That was all ways you can touch people. Like we're massaging, we're applying products, we're applying towels. How does that pan out? What are we doing with that? But we also do energetic work, and we use our hands to do that, mainly because our hands have sensory receptors that allow us to feel vibration. Remember all those sensory receptors on the fingertips. And energy is vibration. So we can both sense the energetic vibrations coming off of people and facilitate their flow with our hands. So we sense energy by placing the hands over the body without touching, and we feel for changes in the vibration, the heat. And as you move to different locations, you're going to feel for those different changes. Now, some people do that with the hands over the body, like maybe 1 to 6 inches away. Some people like to touch the body for that. And that's totally up to you. I put without touching here because that's what I do, but you don't have to do that. You can touch people to sense energy if that's what works for you. Um, but that's one way that we use our hands for energy work. The next one is to touch the area that needs balancing and allow the energy to flow. All you need is a light touch. And part of this actually works through entrainment, which means that we have to set our emotions and our intentions first because our vibration is what affects the person's vibration. We're trying to raise our vibration or change the vibration frequency through entrainment with our frequency. And without touch works the same way, but we don't touch people. And you can do this directly above the location that needs balancing, generally like 1 to 6 inches. So I'll show you from the side, like about that far away. And that's all you need. You can do it over the head. You can do it over the third eye and so on down the body. And you can, as a little experiment right now, I'll show you how to, I'm going to walk you through the self balancing. But even if you just put your hands here, you can feel that. You can feel the heat. You can feel the energy. You can sense when people are near you, even if they're not touching you. That's because we can sense energy. So when we're sensing, we're going to scan the body for, or the aura, depending on how you want to think about it, for energetic imbalances, which all cause different vibrations and temperature changes. We talk a lot more about this in the holistic course, of course, and in the pendulum and chakra balancing, but this is used to inform our energy work during Reiki or any other energy healing. You don't have to call it Reiki. You can sense the energy to use certain crystals or use sound healing or do chakra balancing. And all you have to do is hold your hands over the body and see what you feel. I do recommend trying it on yourself first, and that's going to be, you go down. I like to use the chakras as a starting point because it's a fairly easy system to understand. There's 7 spots that you stop at, and that's very easy as a starting point. And then you expand from there if you want to. So trying it on yourself, you're going to do the crown, the third eye, the throat, and you can do hands like this or like this, or, you know, however it works for you, like this. The heart, the solar plexus, which is right under the breastbone, the sacral chakra, which is right below the belly button, and then the root chakras on the hips. And you just place your hands there and see what you feel. See what happens. And test it on your clients. They don't even have to know you're doing it. Put a mask on them, put them under an LED, or put some crystals on their eyes and stand up and do this. Use a pendulum to assist if you're uncomfortable touching or trusting yourself. Talk about this in the pendulum chakra balancing part, but pendulums are a really great way to see like a physical manifestation of that energy. And so if you, I like to start with this. So I do the sensing with my hands, and then I go back with a pendulum. So I already know what I think is imbalanced in the person, and then I use the pendulum as my confirmation, if that makes sense. I've stopped doing that now. I only use my hands for the most part, but pendulums are a really great way to confirm for you, confirm your intuition. Now with cleansing and balancing, there's some different ways that you can do this. You can try different things and see what happens. The only way to know what works for you is to try things. You have to do it. And there's really no magic recipe because everybody's going to interact with energy differently. Like I said, I think it's helpful to start with focusing just on the chakras because it's basic and easy to understand. And if you look at each chakra, you can get a general idea of what will manifest in the person, and you can ask them really good questions beforehand. So you already have an idea of what you might feel when you touch them. But that's just my personal preference. You can start anywhere. You can do anything. Do whatever you want, okay? If you want to go take a class and pay someone to teach you how to do this, go for it. Like Reiki as an example. I think Reiki is a little problematic. That's my personal opinion, but talk about that at a different time. I just think find a mentor is a better way to do this. Someone who can help you to understand what you're feeling. and understand what works for you and isn't going to force one method or another on you and force you to do it that way because it doesn't really work that way. Meridians are actually another system that provides structure to energetic flow. So that's another way that we can kind of dive into balancing energies is by using traditional Chinese medicine and acupressure points specifically. So like just pressing on those points and seeing what happens. So for cleansing, you can hold your hands over the area to allow energy to flow. You can use vibrations for entrainment. You can move the energy. So like if you feel like maybe they have a blockage here, a lot of built up energy, you can move that energy with your hand. So allow it to flow through the body. And vibrations kind of do that on their own. So let's say you hold like a tuning fork or a sound bowl here, it's going to vibrate and push that energy out. You can also use pressure points. So going back to the idea of traditional Chinese medicine, pressure points are meant to remove blockages in the meridians, which are energetic pathways essentially. So you can use that method. And if you're more interested in that part, then that's going to be in the acupressure self-guided rituals. For balancing, we want to make sure that we focus on the entire body. So it is important to cleanse and balance, I think, all in one treatment. Start by sensing, do your cleansing of those areas, and then balance. Make sure to focus on the entire body. When we give attention to the areas of imbalance, we still want to give the balanced areas some attention because we don't want that energy from the imbalance to flow into that area and then make it imbalanced, right? Like the energy has to go somewhere. So we have to make sure that everything is flowing freely and not just moving places of stagnation to somewhere else. And we do that by, once again, cross-checking. So sense, do your cleansing, maybe sense again, balancing, sense again, come back and check your work, see what's happening. So that is it for touch and energy. I want to talk a little bit about the shadow work aspect. So we're going to talk about shadow in each of these classes because part of what we're talking about is archetypes and light and shadow and being able to integrate shadow so that we can make some changes in the industry and the things that we see. So my main question is, what is it that makes our industry reject touch? Like, why do we think that machines and products do better than we can do? Why do we feel like we need those to be successful? And I had a few, like I have all these notes that I put together. And one of the ones that I had that I think is important to mention is social media. So social media for estheticians highlights like a few specific estheticians that have these really big audiences. And they're all people who don't use touch as a primary modality. And maybe what we're seeing is like their own shadow projection onto the industry. And because they have big audiences, that affects us. Yeah, they want quick, fast results, but I don't even know that they're getting results sometimes. Like I think what they're perceiving as a result is different than what a result actually is. Like they want instant gratification. So like a lack of patience maybe, or a lack of understanding that it can take time. But I really think it's shadow projection. And what are the shadow elements? To me, this is what I see: capitalism. So, I mean, I don't want to go on a long rant about capitalism, but as it affects our industry, machines and products make money. They make money for manufacturers. We talked about this last week. They make money for manufacturers. They make money for the distributors. They make money for product companies. They make money for stores and websites and all of that. They make money for the salespeople. And what ends up happening is these are sold to us as solutions. Like everybody wants to start a company. Everybody wants to make a product that they can sell and make a lot of money because that's what the capitalistic model tells us that we have to do. And the problem is that it's very extractive. So capitalism gives us nothing back. It takes from us. And it makes us feel like we have to work really hard, and that the only way to get ahead is to work really hard and sell a lot of things, really. Just look at like I don't want to rag on chains because I think they're a good place to get a start and understand the industry, but a lot of chain spas focus on numbers. So your value is related to how much money you're making the company. How much are you doing upgrades? How much retail are you selling, etc. And your value then gets wrapped up in what can you sell. And so that's what we learn. That's what we learn is valuable. I mean, I know I taught that when I was teaching aesthetics, that we become more valuable when we sell more retail. And it is true, but it also isn't good, I think. I think that's shadow, like making us feel like we are only valuable if we can make other people money, which is capitalism in itself. So our hands don't make anyone money but us, and the people who sell classes on massage. So that's why I think touch is becoming more important to us. Like we're understanding the value, especially because of COVID and because of touch deprivation. And there are more estheticians now who are showing touch on Instagram, like Kosha Spa, for example. She's one that has a lot of followers, or Noise Skincare has a lot of followers. Those ones are really kind of introducing touch to younger estheticians. And then they can sell classes and make a lot of money. So it's still capitalism at the end of the day. Our hands, like I said, don't make anyone money but us. So they're not a tool that can be sold. And that makes them less desirable. That's it. Like that's what happens. I think that there is an element of shame to being a touch worker. So what we're projecting out, and I talked about this last week a little bit when it comes to like medical versus holistic aesthetics, but one of the things that make us feel like being a medical esthetician or using these machines is better is because there's stigma related to being a touch worker. So what we correlate that with, and I put this in the shadow work book, the workbook, but it's like we're conditioned to believe that touch is only good to a certain extent, and then it becomes it's shadowy. It's in the shadow. Okay, you touch in the shadow. You don't touch out in the light where people can see you. And that relates a lot to sex work. And I honestly, when you see the growth of the beauty industry over time, you see this as an extension of work that only women could do to, or I would say maybe the only work that women could do to support themselves without a man. Initially was sex work, and then it transitioned into beauty work. And I think that those two get really interrelated with touch work. And therefore, it turns it into a shadowy career that we have a lot of shame about. We're also conditioned to not show or appear powerful without the assistance of something else. So it is not desirable to be a powerful person in your own right, or to even say that you have power, because that power has to come from somewhere else. And that has a lot to do with what they call the witch wound, which is this like passed down idea that if you're powerful, you're a witch and someone's going to come after you and kill you. And this gets passed down through generations. I mean, it's not, obviously, at a certain extent, it wasn't about witches. It was about being a powerful woman that men didn't like, being a powerful woman that men didn't want to be around. Therefore, you couldn't get a husband. Therefore, you couldn't have a family. You couldn't fulfill your duty as a woman in our society. And, you know, it's still there, still affecting us. So that's one thing I think. I also think fear. So fear, as a part of our shadow, is really the fear of putting ourselves out there and trying something new. I saw this a lot teaching, that like new students would be scared to touch people because it wasn't normal. It's not normal to like stand behind someone who's basically topless and touch their face. It's not normal to touch people's faces. In normal everyday life, you don't just like walk around touching people's faces. That would be really inappropriate. So once again, the idea of like inappropriate touch is actually what we're doing for a job. Anyway, so it's scary to touch people, which means that a lot of people avoided it and they didn't do it. It's scary to touch people and have them judge you based on just your touch. Like the person's laying there with their eyes closed and their only judgment of you is your touch. That's a lot for people to take in. It's also really scary, I think, to have people pay you for your touch. Like, all I'm going to do is touch you and you're going to pay me for that. That's a weird thing to think about, I think, for a lot of people. Part of it is because we don't have value in ourselves. We think that we need to sell something, right? And it relates to our shadow feelings about money. So I think that these are a lot of the reasons why, these like deep-seated reasons why we don't use touch, but then it gets amplified by social media and those influencers projecting this shadow out into the world. And we begin to think that this is just the way it is. So this is what we need to do to be successful. And that's not true, because success comes from how our clients feel. What are we doing to impact the client? And we know that we can impact clients more with touch. We can help them to heal with touch. We can help them with full body, holistic healing with touch. And I think that that's something that we have to work really hard to reclaim. Raven put in the chat about cuddle therapy. I have seen this too. And once I put this in the shadow workbook because touch therapy is a thing. And when this first started, the immediate response in our brain is to tie that to sex work. They're not just cuddling, they're doing more than that. And there's like this shameful aspect to that. But, or I guess there's another aspect is of why can't they find someone to cuddle on their own? Sometimes you can't, and people need touch to thrive. So if they want to go pay someone to cuddle, go for it. Why not? Right? Those are the types of things that we sometimes as a society like apply meaning to that we need to change. So I think one of the ways that we can do this is really talking more about touch, using touch more in our treatments, and showing touch. Like, we need to bring touch out of the shadow. We need to show doing massage on Instagram. Like, this is actually becoming really popular because of like ASMR. So I think that it's something that we can definitely lean into and make more prevalent, but it takes everyone doing that. Like, if you look at the big Instagram influencer estheticians, their posts are all them using machines. That's cool, but I want to see you do a facial massage. I want to see how you put that product on the face, because that is what makes a treatment for me, not the machine. I need to feel all of that. And you can tell a lot by watching. I feel like a lot of times you can like feel what, even by watching it and not feel like being the one who's on the receiving end, you can feel what they're trying to communicate, which I think is really cool. So something to think about. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. Hope that everyone has a fabulous day whenever you choose to watch this.